I want to talk about this story by Christian Parenti, which is at the Gray Zone, and it's how the organized left got COVID wrong, learned to love lockdowns, and lost its mind, an autopsy. And so I just want to show you a little bit of everything. I'm going to bring the author in, and we're going to talk to him. It says, it is hard to destroy your own cause and feel righteous while doing so, yet the American left has done it. After more than 2 centuries at the vanguard of the struggle for freedom, the American left, broadly defined, executed I don't know what that word is, volte-face? What is that?
Volte-face.
Volte-face. I never heard that. I'm a bricklayer. And embraced anti-working class policies marketed as purely technical public health measures. So let's read that sentence again, because it's important. After more than 2 centuries at the vanguard of the struggle for freedom, the American left, broadly defined, executed a volte-face and embraced anti-working class policies marketed as purely technical public health measures. So that's what those lockdowns and mandates and all those were anti-worker, okay? Just in case you didn't know. For 2 years, the left has championed policies of surveillance and exclusion in the form of punitive vaccine mandates, invasive vaccine passports, socially destructive lockdowns, and radically unaccountable censorship by large media and technology corporations. For the entire pandemic, leftists and liberals, call them the lockdown left, cheered on unprecedented levels of repression aimed primarily at the working class, those who could not afford private schools and could not comfortably telecommute from second homes. Almost the entire left intelligentsia has remained physically stuck in March 2020. Its members have applauded the new biosecurity repression and culminated as liars, grifters, and fascists, any and all who dissented. Typically, they did so without even engaging evidence and while shirking public debate. I've been in a couple of those. They talk in circles. They talk in circles. The liberals who are the lockdown left, they talk in circles. If you try to debate them on mandates or anything, they just talk in circles. They just move the goalposts and they keep. Among the most visible has been Noam Chomsky, the self-described anarcho-syndicalist who calls for the unvaccinated. We covered this. He called for the unvaccinated to remove themselves from society and suggested that they should be allowed to go hungry if they refuse to submit. In Jacobin, a magazine claiming to support the working class in all its struggles, Branko Marcetic demanded the unvaccinated be barred from public transportation. One obvious course of action is for Biden to make vaccines a requirement for mass transport. Now, I remember us reporting that something like 73% of young black people in Manhattan and New York City were unvaccinated. And so that's who that would be aimed at. Keep them off public transportation so they can't go to work. Journalist Doug Henwood has scolded the unvaccinated with "get over your own bloated sense of self-importance." But Henwood has championed shutting down all of society in the name of safety while refusing to engage counter-arguments, a combination that suggests a bloated self-importance of his own. Even the American Civil Liberties Union, long a bastion of objective thinking and civil liberties absolutism, has supported the mandates, lockdowns, and censorship after being 100% against them the year earlier. David Cole, the group's legal director, debased himself in the New York Times with a tortured op-ed explaining how everything the ACLU stood for over the last 100 years suddenly did not apply during the season of freakout and overreach. All of this unmasks the lockdown left's blue city provincialism. Its adherents drink high-quality coffee and enjoy bike lanes, but have revealed themselves to be as narrow-minded, clannish, mean-spirited, and faith-based as any group of small-down deplorables might be. Hear, hear, yes. If you don't agree with the consensus in Cambridge, Brooklyn, Bethesda, or Berkeley, then you are obviously insane. End of story. For this set, COVID vaccines have become a fetish, a talisman that to wave against the specter of contagion, while lockdowns and censorship are treated as purely technical, apolitical interventions. Prominent left intellectuals have embraced the weaponization of solidarity and made it into a lifestyle via their obsessive masking, scolding, and hiding. They pretend to care for society while actually applauding deeply antisocial and scientifically ungrounded policies like the indefinite shuttering of schools. All of this is contingent upon the status of lockdown leftists as relatively privileged laptop workers who can operate from the comfort of home, dependent on anonymous frontline workers ferrying food and Amazon packages to their doorstep. Prior to the pandemic quarantines, many left intellectuals already lived as if they were on lockdown. I know this because I am part of that class, says the author. Never mind that we are in the tightest labor market in 40 years and should be encouraging workers to unite and fight the bosses for better conditions. Instead, most of the left, including some trade unions, has supported measures that divide, distract, and intimidate the working class. It is a tragic and disturbing spectacle. The socialist left, which wants to use state power to discipline capital, has instead accepted the negative image of its goal: state power used to bully, harass, and discipline workers. Richard Wolff, we spoke about this on the show. The left's embrace of COVID hysteria makes a mockery of the left's goals of planning, industrial policy, economic redistribution, worker empowerment, and environmental sustainability. This left-wing self-harm will have deleterious consequences for years to come. Indeed, the situation is worse than mere political fumble. I agree with this 100%. The left is now actively helping its own enemies. It is in its unwavering support for mandates, passports, punitive lockdowns, and censorship. The organized left has sided with technocratic elites, the 1%, and the repressive state apparatus everywhere, which that is 100% true. So let me bring in the author of that article, which appears in Gray Zone. It's Dr. Christian Parenti. He is a professor in the Department of Economics at John Jay College. Previously, as a journalist, he reported from all over the world for publications including The Nation, Fortune, the London Review of Books, and the New York Times. He's also the author of a number of books, including his latest, Radical Hamilton, Economic Lessons from a Misunderstood Founder. Please welcome Dr. Christian Parenti. Wow, that was a great article. Thanks for writing that.
Thank you for reading it. Thanks for having me on the show.
So I've been pushing back against this as best I can. I've been losing friends because of it. What's it like in academia to be speaking sense? Because what I'm actually doing is the thing that those people, and what you're doing is the thing that they claim to be doing, which is following the science. And as we've shown on this show, nobody is following the science in the government. Like Dr. Fauci has been lying about the science repeatedly over and over and over. And now Pfizer is being forced by a court order, finally, to reveal what their vaccine trials said. They didn't want to. They had to get a court to do that. And still no critique from my friends in entertainment on the left about any of this stuff. What's it like in academia?
Well, in academia, the pressure to toe the mainstream line is very intense. So, you know, most people who dissent keep quiet about it. But since publishing this article, I have been surprised by the number of people who have come out and written me positive emails about it. Many of them, some of them at least, in academia. But yeah, it's total orthodoxy reigns in academia. Really awful intimidation of staff and students is accepted as completely normal. At John Jay, where we have a fantastic master's program, one of the few kind of master's programs in radical political economy in the country, very cheap. You know, we have lost at least one student who didn't want to take the vaccine and was just forced out, and this was accepted as normal. Another former student who now teaches in our undergraduate program, was forced to take the vaccine despite their doctor saying, you know, you've got health problems, you shouldn't do this. And there's been no support by and large from the larger institution and not from our union. So And actually, I'm in many ways, I'm at one of the better schools. The stories from other places sound even worse. It's just this total groupthink, and what it's revealed to me is the kind of fraudulent nature of a lot of people's reading habits. I happen to be quite severely dyslexic, so I'm actually pretty insecure about claiming to have read things I haven't read and skimming in it. It seems to me that most people just listen to NPR. Most professors who support this stuff just listen to NPR or sort of skim New York Times headlines, and thus they are stuck in March 2020. And I say that with some sympathy for the position of March 2020. In the beginning, I too was terrified.
Me too.
I was washing my groceries and scolding my mother that she wasn't doing the same.
Yes, I was yelling at people.
Because I was freaked out, I was also watching very closely the developments, and it quickly became clear that, wait a minute, this is a serious disease, but it's not the second coming of the Spanish flu. And I kept waiting, thinking, oh, well, now comes the big rethink. When New York City opened 5 field hospitals and then had to close them because basically nobody used them, I thought naively, oh, well, now we're going to have a public discussion about, wait a minute, where do we go from here? No. And we didn't, because as I explained in the article, the election was the larger context, and Trump derangement syndrome was in the saddle.
That's very interesting, because I remember they sent a Navy ship to New York City. That was a hospital. As far as I know, nobody ever filled up one of those beds. They opened up and what I also reported on the show, people keep saying, well, you have to get, after you say, hey, the vaccine does not prevent transmission and it does not stop contraction. YouTube says that it slows both those things. That's what YouTube says. The FDA says they hope it prevents transmission. But now Dr. Fauci is saying that no matter if you're vaccinated or not, everybody's going to get COVID. And they've been saying that ever since I started looking into this, which was like last June. Even with Delta, they were saying very quietly, everybody's going to get this, meaning that the vaccines are not going to stop everybody from getting. So they've known this forever. So how can you justify a vaccine mandate knowing that everybody's going to get it and that this vaccine isn't going to prevent you from getting it? And if you're going to get it, who do you care if you get it from a vaccinated person or an unvaccinated person? When I ask that question to people, they just immediately go, well, what about the hospital beds? So they never answer that question. And have you bumped up against the same kind of circular thinking or arguing?
Yeah, it's constantly shifting to new positions. Yes, absolutely. Well, what about the most vulnerable? Doing it for protecting other people. Right. Yeah,
but it doesn't stop you from getting it.
Yeah, and I quote Rochelle Walensky in the piece, or reference an interview she gave on August 5th of last year, where she says that the vaccines don't stop transmission. There have been some studies that indicate maybe they slow it a little bit, but it's the effect is not enough to justify lockdowns, which we now also know have harms. Obviously, they have harms. Massive 30% increase in murder, massive increases in drug overdoses, on and on and on. Right. So, what part of how the hysteria is maintained is to refuse to allow public conversations about the cost-benefit analysis, which we do all the time. But to suggest that there's a cost-benefit analysis in this was just, you're immediately accused of trying to kill people's grandparents or kids. But in fact, we're constantly making cost-benefit analysis. And with all medicine, that's the case. And doctors will tell you that. They say, well, there's certain benefits from this medicine. There's also certain risks. I mean, down to aspirin, right? We're like, well, this is good for, your cardiovascular system to take a little bit of aspirin. But, there is also a little bit of bleeding that can happen. And, right? I mean, no medical intervention is without some risk. So you couldn't discuss the cost benefit analysis of shutting schools.
Yes.
Of, masking people, et cetera. The CDC, OSHA, this is not in the article, but OSHA, prior to the pandemic, a friend of mine went on the Wayback Machine and looked this up. If you were an employer and you required your employees to wear a mask all day, you had to give them physicals every year proving that they were healthy enough to sustain that. Those rules were changed. So, eliminate any room for doubt or questioning. That's how the
And you know, it was obvious
cash
that
grab.
people like Fauci and Collins at the NIH and Valencia were manipulating data, and they weren't. They were speaking like used car salesmen about natural immunity, for instance. And now we find out that Pfizer was covering up data about that revealed that there was natural immunity. And I find a video, which I'm going to show in my next segment. I should probably put it in this one. That shows that Dr. Fauci was asked, hey, my grandmother just had the flu. Should she still get the flu vaccine? And he said, of course not. And natural infection always gives you better immunity than a vaccine. That's what Fauci said. I'm going to show that video. In fact, please insert that video into here right now in post. And it was just obvious and it was so to me, what I loved about your article was that it just shows the failings of people who consider themselves progressive lefties and skeptics and critics of government and big pharma and corporations and all things lefty. They know that the government is 100% corrupted by big corporations. They know big pharma are the biggest criminals in the world. They just hooked half the country on opioids. They don't care. They paid the biggest. They know they're both evil and corrupt, but when they come together, I guess they make beautiful babies. And if you question any of it, you're immediately smeared as an anti-vaxxer, even when they admit that they were lying. Dr. Fauci has admitted that since day one, he's been lying. He's been lying about the origin of the virus, whether it could have come from a lab or not. He lied about that, whether it could have or not. He lied. And then we caught him. He lied about funding that research that could have led to that virus, which is called gain of function. He lied to Congress twice. He lied about wearing masks. You know how I know he lied about wearing masks? He told us he lied to us about wearing masks for months. He also lied about herd immunity over and over and over again. And you know, I know he lied about herd immunity. He told us he lied about herd immunity. So, and now we're finding out that they've been suppressing data about natural immunity. And when he was asked by Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN, why should somebody have to be mandated to take a vaccine if they've already gotten COVID and they have natural immunity, which is what the Israeli studies are showing? And he said, I don't have a really good answer for you on that. Yet we still mandate that. So your point of your article is that these people who consider themselves real lefties and progressives have really handed all their issues and pushed away people who maybe were their natural constituents over to being right-wingers. Because now anybody who questions big pharma or Fauci or the government or the COVID narrative is now called a right-winger and a Trumper, and you're pushing them away, just like they did to the truckers. That should have been a moment of organizing for the left. Instead, they pushed them all into another party. And go ahead. I'm sorry. I'll stop talking.
Yeah, and there's also, the CDC has also not released data that it's been collecting, right? There was an article February 22nd in the New York Times about how the CDC is not releasing, large amounts of the data. It's collecting particularly about hospitalization by vaccination status,
right?
Particularly for younger people, right? That suggests that, and their reasons were that it could be misinterpreted. That suggests that the data on that is not flattering to the vaccine. But yeah, my theory of the crime is that, if you look at ever since the 1976 swine flu, there's been this kind of pandemic industrial complex in place, pharma and the regulatory agencies. The regulatory agencies, I quote the CDC and FDA's websites where they explain how 45% of their funding comes directly from industry, right? So they don't hide this, right? So this symbiosis between the regulators and industry, ever since the 76 swine flu, they've been pushing to hype every possible pandemic. In 76, 20% of the country was vaccinated before they realized that the swine flu was not that dangerous. It may have killed no one at all, and that the vaccine was creating autoimmune disease, and they suspended the vaccination campaign. And so there has always been a kind of enough critical capacity in the political class of both parties and the journalistic class to push back against this pandemic industrial complex when they get all hyped up about Zika or this or that or the other thing. This time, that didn't happen because of Trump derangement syndrome, right? The journalistic class was so united in their terror of Trump that they realized, okay, this time we've got him. And they were right. His mismanagement of the pandemic was part of how he was, how he was defeated. So that was the kind of purpose, and it came down from on high from the Democratic Party. It was picked up by the, whatever you want to call it, the left intelligentsia and the movement left, the organized left. But then after the election, they couldn't let go, right? Even when Gavin Newsom faces a recall, which was provoked by his excessively harsh lockdowns and mandates.
While not following his own mandates.
Right. So he faces a recall. That never should have happened. Democratic Party and pundits should have been concerned about that. They take the exact wrong lesson from that. They say, well, this just shows Gavin Newsom won, right? So this is what, we want more of this. And it's not until the election in Virginia where Youngkin, now Governor Youngkin, comes out of nowhere, and there's basically a 20-point swing towards the Republicans. And it's very clear that this is being led in large part by women, and that one of their central concerns is the closing of schools. This is a state that had one of the harshest school lockdowns. People were getting arrested for using playgrounds in Virginia. And this was central to Youngkin winning. And then Governor Murphy in New Jersey, who's, was favored to win, almost lost. At that point, you begin to see a rethink, a kind of haphazard rethink coming from the Biden administration. But still, the lockdown left is really wedded to this whole, lifestyle, the ritual of, virtue signaling and shaming, and,
I know people. I
have to resort to psychology at a certain level. It's just that there's some sort of sadomasochistic thrill in all this, policing others and submitting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's very authoritarian, and you see that in a lot of people who consider themselves lefties. They have an authoritarian in their shadow. And it was very easy to see people who hated the Trump most were the people who were the most like Trump, but they were denying it to themselves. And people like Keith Olbermann, who calls for everybody to be censored. He called for me to be censored from all social media because why? Because we pointed out that he's an idiot. Here is
which once upon a time would have been like, oh, that's crazy. Someone's calling for censorship in the United States.
Yeah.
And now this is happening routinely on a mass scale, as you've been reporting.
Yeah.
All of Chris Hedges' videos gone. I mean, this is like.
Yeah, the president of the United States was taken down from the Republican National Committee's own YouTube page because they said Donald Trump spread misinformation on their podcast. The president of the really? So when doesn't a politician spread misinformation? That's what they do for a living. You should take down every politician then. That should scare everybody. But let me show you Dr. Fauci. Here's what he was at. Here we go.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And so
if she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine. If she really has the flu,
she should not get it again.
No, she doesn't need it, because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
Preach, Dr. Fauci.
And I want to show you one more thing. I'm going to play in my. I want to show you this. This came out today. This is from The Hill. So Pfizer is being court ordered to release their documents about the vaccine trials. They've been court ordered. They weren't going to do it, so a court had to force them. That's the opposite of how medicine should work. It should be transparent. And so now we have to get a court to force the vaccine makers, and you still are called an anti-vaxxer if you don't trust them. Here we go.
Shell in the document is that natural immunity works, and Pfizer knows it. The clinical trial data showed those with previous infection of COVID had no difference in outcome than those vaccinated. In the limited trial, none of the vaccinated nor those with previous infection resulted in severe disease defined by either the FDA or the CDC. They were broken up into two different groups. The FDA and the CDC define severe COVID slightly differently. The CDC roughly defines it as anyone needing hospitalization, whereas the FDA defines it as anyone needing supplemental oxygen. Either way, there were 0 cases of severe COVID in the natural immunity group, whether they were vaccinated or not. And their own data also showed that natural immunity was statistically identical to the vaccine against infection. That's what their data showed. Yet, rather than say People with natural immunity don't seem to need the vaccine, which is what they've been saying in Europe, for example. Pfizer instead spun their conclusion and said, quote, final efficacy results show that the vaccine provided protection against COVID-19 in participants with or without evidence of prior infection with SARS-CoV-2.
So that's the most recent. That's from today. I just saw that as I was coming on air. So what do you think? Can I just get you to what do you you talk about the deleterious effects of this on what do you think will be the effects of this on people who consider on the left? Or I know for Democrats it's devastating because let's remember the biggest voting bloc is the people who don't vote. The next biggest voting bloc are people who consider themselves independents. The next smallest voting bloc is the Democrats and Republicans. So so if the fight is always for those independents who vote and they're losing that, right?
Yeah, they're losing it big time. And I, even though I'm angry at the lockdown left and Democrats, I do not welcome this at all. I mean, I think the effect could be that the Republicans win so big that they could have trifectas in 3/4 of the states, right? The kind of the Koch-funded ultimate goal is to have the governorship and both houses in 3/4 of the states, because then you can start passing constitutional amendments and you can do stuff like privatize the post office, privatize Social Security, basically make it illegal to form a union. This is their, long-term goal. And it's always been just out of reach. But, this electoral wipeout in the making could lead to that. That would be terrible. I mean, that would be really, really bad for a long time. Also, I mean, I know several people in rural New England where I live who are level-headed, voted for Bernie Sanders, and are going to vote Republican just to send a message. I don't get the impression, having looked into the polling a little bit, that there's any attempt to poll for this. I don't think that the Democratic consultant class and the kind of left liberal intellectuals have a handle on how really angry people are about this. And, bodily autonomy isn't that important to you if you want the vaccine. It doesn't feel like an invasion to get it. And it's hard for people who were relieved to get the vaccine to imagine what it's like to be somebody else who doesn't want the vaccine for whatever reason and to be forced to get it. It's a really serious violation. The kind of anger that people develop from that is intense. I have received a lot of feedback from this article, really, honestly, more than I have from anything I've ever written. And the emotion and rage in some of these emails is kind of spooky at times. And so I think there's going to be a big surprise, and there's going to be really, bad consequences. And it damages the left's brand, right? It's like, oh, you're the people who are against civil liberties.
Yes.
And you're the people who are against freedom. And let's be clear about why that is so bad, right? The core of the left agenda historically is freedom, right? The anarchist and socialist left, for 150 years, their whole agenda was to make the promise of the Enlightenment real, to make the false promises of sort of centrist liberalism into a reality by redistributing wealth and, making human emancipation possible and not just a couple of catchphrases, right? So freedom, civil liberties, is not an add-on to the left agenda. It is historically at the heart of the left agenda. That is why there is a struggle by socialists around the world for 100 years to redistribute wealth. It's not just so that people can have a better standard of living, but so that people can be freed from want and exploitation and physical, economic oppression, so that they can be free, right? So dismissing that is terrible. Also, civil liberties. My first 2 books dealt directly with civil liberties, and I think all my work has touched on it to some extent. But the history of civil liberties is a history of the left pushing to expand these rights. So the First Amendment was not considered a national right for a long time. This was only a right you had on federal property, and states didn't have to respect the First Amendment. The struggle to nationalize the First Amendment, as it were, was led by the left. It was socialists, communists, anarchists getting arrested, the Wobblies, their free speech struggles, right? All the great landmark cases that make the First Amendment a national reality were led by the left. And now the left is turning its back on this, even pathologizing that whole history. This is bad in and of itself, and it's going to have very bad effects politically for the brand, as well. It's good. Well, the attractiveness of the left.
Well, I mean, for me, Russiagate was a big nosedive for the left. They embraced CIA talking points. They became the mouthpiece for Democratic propaganda, and they became the McCarthyites themselves. They turned into the thing we used to hate about the right. The left became it. And embraces it till this day. And now they embrace authoritarianism with these anti-science mandates, because that is what they are. There is no science that you can show me that supports them without talking in a circle, right?
Yeah. And there's now, as you just laid out, there's science indicating the opposite, that you do not need these vaccines if you have acquired immunity. You're going to get nothing from it, right?
According to Pfizer's own data, as reported by The Hill. That's what I can say. That I can't, but of course,
that lawsuit. It's worth mentioning, right? That I believe these papers are coming out because
of a lawsuit.
The FDA was sued to release all the data that Pfizer gave it.
That's right.
And the FDA said, "Okay, we'll do that over 55 years."
75 years.
75 years.
That's right.
And then the plaintiffs came back and they said, well, why don't you just take 108 days, since that's the same amount of time you used to review that data that was submitted by Pfizer before you approved these vaccines.
So the left is good. Well, the Democrats will be wiped out. The left will. I don't think they're ever going to restructure, because people who consider themselves Bernie-crats have embraced the Hillary Clinton propaganda train and Joe Biden and the whole thing, and Trump has been their boogeyman, and it's turned them into morons. And so there is no left, and now they're embracing authoritarianism. They're all embracing this war in Ukraine like more. It's amazing to watch this happen. The same people who've lied us into every war are lying us into this, and it's a Democrat, and everybody just pretends it's not happening. I mean, there is no anti-war left. There's no anti-mandate left. There's no nothing. There's no anti-Russiagate. There's no anti-CIA left. It's they've embraced it 100%, and those people will never admit it. But just like the people will never admit that they were wrong about Russiagate, they'll never admit that they were wrong about mandates or the COVID narrative, and they will never admit they were wrong to bite their tongue in criticizing Fauci and Collins at the NIH, and for not discussing the Great Barrington Declaration, and for making them think that people who are doctors at Harvard and Stanford who have a different view on how to handle COVID are somehow on the fringe crazy people. That's what the left media did. The left did the work of talking about ivermectin as some kind of horse poison instead of what it is, an essential medicine on the WHO list of essential medicines, and it's a Nobel Prize. And they're all dupes for big pharma. And I mean, these are people close to me, people far from me, people I work with, people I used to work with, people. It's everywhere, and it's infected. People who still don't think we landed on the moon aren't skeptical of the COVID narrative coming from Fauci, the government, and big pharma. That's just mind blowing.
Yeah, it's deeply depressing. It is deeply depressing, and it is. I mean, there's a lot in this that I understand, the smash and grab operation by Big Pharma. I mean, Pfizer has made in 2021, they made $22 billion in profits, right? Their business grew by 92%. It's pretty clear, like the interest involved there. And then everybody who's, got Pfizer in their stock portfolio, why they'd go along with it. There's lots of this. It makes real clear material sense. But there is an element of this left hysteria, and I hesitate to continually use that word, but there's a kind of mad quality to this that I really don't get fully what that is. And in some of the letters I've received from this article, people tell their stories about this, and it's like that's what's chilling about it. People describing their close friend, that they had to break up with because their friend was like calling the cops on their working class neighbors for socializing on a stoop outside.
Oh my God.
I mean, this kind of stuff where it's like, what explains that? I don't I don't
So
quite
it's just they just found. I'm not kidding. People who are the biggest skeptics of everything in the world that I know personally, who come from comedy even, became propagandists. Right? Shamed people for doing their own research. Oh, what are you doing your own research? When have you ever heard? Why don't you just tell them to stop reading? Because that's what you're doing. It's like, oh, what are you reading? Well, well, we got ourselves a reader. Like I'm in the middle of a Bill Hicks bit or something. It is crazy to see it happen to people on the left. People not only not question the COVID narrative, but shame people who did their own research. And you know why I had to do? I got injured by the vax. I had to do my own research because nobody else was going to do it for me. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think some of that is like there's a cult around science, right? There's like scientism. People forget that like the history of science is a history of like one paradigm falling after another, right? Total certainty eventually crumbling, right? Constant revolution and you know, critical thinking and undermining and attacking and debate. So people are unaware of that, and the science industry, as it were, has built this aura of invincibility around it. And so there's a kind of cult of scientism. And I think that part of what drives this is the fear that if you dissent from the herd of people who you know are embracing the science, that you're going to look like you're an idiot, right? And that so at the heart of it is a kind of politics of respectability, and that if you know, and people just don't want to risk being shunned, right?
That's right.
Even though the real history of science is the history of dissidents being like, well, wait, excuse me, I'm finding something different here, like, you know.
Of course.
So I think there's that. I think that, and that's also part of why I think, you know, what we're talking about here is really like the left is a middle class formation, right? It's a professional, managerial middle class thing, and the politics of respectability are very intense in that class. More so than in the working class, where it's like, you know, you don't expect people to listen to you and respect your opinion if you're, you know, a landscaper or you know, a line chef, and so people are actually kind of intellectually more free.
I agree. Christian Parenti's been our guest. He's written a great article at the Gray Zone about the lockdown left. We'll put a link to it underneath there. Dr. Parenti, I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you. Good luck with everything.
Come see a live stand-up show or be in Orlando, Tampa, Cleveland, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, Omaha, Des Moines, everywhere. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for our live show tickets. Also, become a premium member, get access to all our extra stuff, and help support the show. See you at a live show. Single tickets now available. Single tickets available.